You have to understand the silence that followed my father home. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind, the kind that sat in a room and didn't move. He was one of millions stepping off those ships, carrying images in his head no man ever learned how to explain. They didn't talk about the war. They didn't talk about the hunger before it, the depression, the empty cupboards, the long winters. They were finished with the past. What they wanted was a clean surface, a blank page, a small piece of earth they could finally call their own. I was born right into that moment, that massive shift we later named the boom. To them, I wasn't just a child. I was evidence, proof that life was moving forward again. They treated the future like something fragile, something that had to be protected. Paperwork turned into possibility. Forms turned into houses, small, square, sturdy, homes that smelled like fresh pine and wet concrete. They used the GI Bill like it was scripture, and somehow it worked. I still remember the hum of our first refrigerator, that low, steady vibration filling the kitchen, and the way my mother looked at it, not like an appliance, like a miracle that had quietly taken a seat in the corner. Every coat of white paint on the fence meant something. Every nail, every board, every repair made after work. It wasn't decoration, it was defiance. A silent refusal to ever return to chaos. They weren't just building houses. They were building a shield against uncertainty, against loss, against a world that had already taken their youth once. Inside those walls, we breathed security. We absorbed it before we had language for it. We knew, somehow, that nothing around us was accidental. Everything existed because our parents had fought like hell to make it possible. We were the reason, the living proof that all that suffering had meant something. Childhood back then had a sound, the sharp slap of a screen door hitting its frame. That was the signal. The moment it slammed shut behind you, the world opened. You weren't a kid anymore. You were a citizen of the block. No schedules, no calendars, no one checking the time, no tracking devices humming in your pocket, just a bike, a pair of scraped up sneakers, and a whole day that belonged to you. The neighborhood felt endless. Sidewalks stretched like highways. Backyards blended together. Alleys became shortcuts. Woods became countries. We disappeared for hours, 8 of them sometimes. And as long as you showed up when dinner was called, no one asked where you'd been. Doors stayed unlocked. You ran into a friend's house without knocking, grabbed a glass of water, maybe a cookie. Their mother barely looked up. You were already known. We learned the world by being inside it. The weather came from the wind on your face. Time came from shadows stretching across asphalt. We didn't play outside. We lived there. And the adults only ever saw fragments of it through the kitchen window. That freedom was real, but it wasn't invisible, because the neighborhood was watching, always, 100 quiet eyes, people like Mrs. Miller, 3 doors down. She sat on her porch every afternoon with a glass of iced tea, looking relaxed, but she wasn't resting. She was monitoring the perimeter. She knew your full name, your parents' number, exactly how far you were allowed to go. I remember being 10 years old, flying down the sidewalk, feeling untouchable. I cut straight through Mr. Thompson's flower bed. I checked left, checked right. Nothing. Or so I thought. Before I reached the end of the block, her voice cut through the air. "Boy, get your tail back here. Right now." She didn't call my mother. She didn't write anything down. She handled it right there, on the concrete. She explained clearly why respect wasn't optional. And I listened. Because you didn't talk back to adults. Not if you valued your teeth. Every grown-up on that street was a temporary guardian of your character. Your reputation followed you, quietly, relentlessly. You learned fast that who you were in public had to match who you were at home. If the neighborhood shaped our behavior, the playground shaped our bodies. Playgrounds back then were not gentle places. No soft rubber, no rounded plastic, no safety signs, just iron, wood, and asphalt baked hard by the sun. The laws were simple. Physics applied to everyone. I can still feel that metal slide in July. 12 feet of aluminum turned into a branding iron. You knew it would burn. You felt it coming. And still, you sat down anyway. You rode it all the way to the bottom. because hesitation wasn't part of the deal. The merry-go-round was worse. A spinning mass of steel. We'd get the biggest kid to push it until the world blurred. You held on while your fingers screamed. If you let go, you didn't fall onto safety. You hit dirt or gravel. We came home scraped, bleeding, stinging. Our mothers dabbed mercurochrome that burned worse than the wound, then told us to wash up for dinner. We weren't fragile. Those playgrounds made sure of that. They taught us something early. The world wouldn't soften itself for us, so we learned how to take the impact. When we wanted a place to belong, we didn't ask for one. We built it. Vacant lots, edges of the woods, hidden corners no one claimed. We scavenged. Plywood dragged from construction scraps, warped boards pulled from trash piles. I stole my father's hammer when he wasn't looking. Asking permission meant delay, and that fort wasn't going to wait. There were no instructions, no tutorials, just hands, guesswork, and confidence we hadn't earned yet. Support beams went where they seemed right. Most of the time, they weren't. Rain taught us quickly. If the roof was wrong, everything got soaked. Our first forts collapsed, every one of them, and nobody cried. We looked at the wreckage, shifted our grip, and started again. Failure wasn't dramatic, it was expected. By the end, the structure looked ridiculous. Crooked walls, mismatched nails, a roof that leaked constantly, but it was ours, built by us. Inside those shaky walls, we learned something quietly. Things don't exist just because you want them to. If you want something in this world, you have to stand up and build it yourself. Sometimes, no matter how hard you tried, you still lost. You could swing the bat perfectly and miss anyway. You could run until your lungs burned and still come in last. You could finally gather the courage to ask her to dance and hear the word no echo louder than the music around you. And nobody came running. No one argued with the coach. No one demanded fairness. No one softened the moment. There were no ribbons for simply showing up. If you lost, you felt it, fully. The weight of it settling in your chest on that long walk home. You replayed every mistake, every second, every choice, and it hurt. But then something quiet happened. The sun came up the next morning. Your friends still knocked on your door. The street looked the same. The world kept moving. It didn't pause to acknowledge your failure. And that was the lesson. By being allowed to lose, you learned something protection could never teach. You learned that disappointment doesn't destroy you. That embarrassment fades. That a no isn't the end of your story. You didn't become confident because someone told you you were special. You became confident because you failed completely and discovered you were still standing. Just when it felt like the world had settled into something predictable, the sound changed. It slipped in through the radio, uninvited. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't polite. It didn't belong to your parents' world. It was sharp, electric, restless, and it felt dangerous in a way you couldn't explain yet. Then we saw him, Elvis Presley. The adults didn't merely dislike him. They feared him. You could see it on their faces. My father shook his head like something uncontrollable had entered the house. My mother reached for the dial the moment those hips moved. To them, it looked like civilization losing its grip. To us, it was impossible to look away. When he appeared on television, the room changed. The screaming, the movement, the energy. It wasn't about the music. It was about permission. A door opening into a world our parents had never known. A world they didn't want to enter. They thought culture was collapsing. But we could feel it. Something new was being born. Something that belonged to us. And whether the adults approved or not, the ground beneath them was already shifting. Not every change came with music. Some came with a siren, a long, steady wail that reached straight into your chest. I can still feel the wood grain of that classroom desk under my palms, bolted to the floor, carved with old initials. When the sound began, Mrs. Crawford's voice stayed calm, almost casual. "Get under your desks, children." Now. We crawled beneath them, curled inward, hands laced behind our necks. 25 bodies, perfectly still. The lights hummed overhead. Someone's sneaker squeaked. We called it duck and cover. Even then we knew the truth. A wooden desk wasn't going to save anyone if the sky actually burned. We understood, without saying it, that somewhere far away there were weapons with our names on them. But we didn't cry. We didn't scream. We accepted it. When the all clear sounded, we climbed back into our seats, picked up our pencils, returned to long division like nothing had happened. Those drills weren't about bombs. They were about weight, about learning how to carry fear without letting it stop you. You learned early that safety was never guaranteed, and the answer wasn't panic. It was continuation. You finished your work. Then came October of '62, 13 days when the world forgot how to breathe. This time it wasn't practice. I remember watching my father. The man who could fix anything. For the first time, he had no answers. He didn't joke, didn't dismiss it. He stared at the television in silence. We were old enough to calculate distances and young enough to understand how helpless we were. When it passed, hope slowly returned. Briefly. Then November came. The announcement crackled through the school loudspeaker. I watched my teacher's face lose its color. The president had been shot. They sent us home early. The streets felt different, heavier, quieter. When I walked through the door, my parents were already there, frozen in front of the television, watching Walter Cronkite remove his glasses. That moment changed something forever. It wasn't just grief, it was realization. The people meant to protect us could disappear. Heroes could fall, and then they kept falling. King, then Bobby Kennedy. Each time the illusion cracked wider. We watched our parents cry. And in that moment, we understood something we never forgot. The adults didn't have all the answers. They were human, just like us. So when people look at my generation now, they often see nostalgia, statistics, old photographs. They miss what's underneath, the steel. We were raised by people who survived hunger and won a world war. They didn't teach fragility. They taught endurance. We played on playgrounds that would never be allowed today. We built forts from scraps. We learned that a scraped knee wasn't tragedy. It was proof you'd been living. We watched the world change through a flickering screen. First music that frightened our parents, then violence that broke their hearts. We buried our heroes. We watched cities burn. And still, we got up in the morning. No manuals, no validation, no language for trauma. We just kept going, because that's what you did. We learned something early. Safety isn't given, it's built. With your hands, with your choices, with your spine. Hope was never about certainty. It was about standing even when certainty vanished. The world broke our hearts again and again, and still, the sun kept rising. That isn't optimism. That's wisdom, earned slowly, quietly, by a generation that learned who they were by building themselves from the ground up.